I'm not going to tell you this is the most amazing thing you'll ever hear. People who start that way are usually selling something, and I've got nothing to sell you but the truth as I lived it. What I'll tell you instead is this. I once watched a whole valley laugh at a wall. I laughed too, laughed the loudest, if I'm being honest, because that's what scared men do. And then one winter the laughing stopped, and the snow came down like the sky had finally given up on us, and the only green thing left alive for 40 miles was growing against the side of that useless wall. I have thought about that wall every winter of my life since. I think about it when the price of feed goes up. I think about it when I catch myself deciding a thing is worthless just because I don't understand it yet. Stay with me to the end of this and I believe you'll think about it too, not the wall exactly, but the woman who built it and the part of myself I'm still ashamed of, and the part I'm not. That's the trade I'm offering, my honesty for your patience. Let's begin. The plant was in my hand, and I still didn't believe it. Green, cold stiff but green, a little curl of winter spinach with frost beating along the edge of each leaf like somebody had salted it. And I stood there in snow up to my shins, turning it over and over the way you'd turn over a coin you suspected was counterfeit. My breath came out in clouds. Behind me, my horse stamped and blew and wanted to be anywhere with a roof. And in front of me ran the wall, that long, low curve of stacked sandstone the color of an old bruise, gold and rust, and that deep red the rock goes when the sun's been on it. And at the foot of the wall, in a bed of dark dug earth, things were growing. In January, in the worst January any living soul in that country could remember. I want to be careful here, because a man telling a story has a way of making himself the hero of it, and I was not the hero. I was a thief, that morning, or close enough to one that the difference wouldn't have meant much to a judge. I had come down off the ridge with an empty belly and an emptier conscience, and the half-formed idea that the Apache settlement in the draw had food and my family did not, and that the snow would cover my tracks coming and going. I had a rifle on my back I told myself was for wolves. I'd like to say I came to my senses on my own. I didn't. The wall stopped me. The wall and that one ridiculous green leaf frozen at the edges and alive at the heart. Let me back up. I've always kept a ledger. My wife Mary used to say I'd tally the stars if I could find a long enough night, and the habit of accounting is the only way I know to tell a thing straight. So let me account for how I came to be standing thief-footed in another family's garden in the dead of winter, holding a miracle I had personally mocked. My name is Elias Brandt, and in the autumn of that year I owned, on paper, 430 head of cattle. I write that number down still. I write it because by the following spring the true number was 31, and a man should remember the shape of what he lost so he doesn't lie to himself about it later. We ran cattle in the high country north of the Gila, where the grass came up thin but sweet, and the winters, in an ordinary year, were a thing you endured rather than feared. I'd built the place with my own hands and my brother's before the fever took him. I had Mary, and our boy Tom, who was 9 and serious as a parson, and a girl, Ada, who was 6 and afraid of nothing on God's earth, which terrified me daily. We were not rich. We were the particular kind of poor that owns a great deal and can't eat any of it. The Apache families lived down in the draw, maybe 3 miles by the trail, closer if you cut across the rim. There were perhaps 40 of them. I never got an honest count, which galled me, a man who counts things, and they had been settled there longer than I had, though you'd not have known it from the way the territory talked. The talk was ugly. I'll not pretend I didn't share in it. When you're frightened of your own future, you go looking for somebody to be bigger and meaner than, and the whole country had decided those 40 people would do. I'd seen the woman before. That summer, that's where the wall comes in. She was older than me, 50s, I'd have guessed, though I was a poor judge of it. Her face weathered the way good leather weathers, lines around the eyes that came from squinting at distances, and I'd learn from a great deal of laughing, which surprised me, because I'd assumed grief was the only weather those families ever knew. I never learned to say her name the way her own people said it. I heard it 3 different ways from 3 different mouths, and I'm not going to butcher it on this page for the sake of pretending I knew her better than I did. The children called her something that translated more or less to grandmother, though she wasn't grandmother to all of them. I came to think of her privately as the Stone Woman, and I'll call her that here, and I hope wherever she is she'll forgive a tired old rancher the liberty. The first time I really took notice of her, she was carrying rock. It was August, heat coming off the ground in sheets. I'd ridden down toward the draw chasing a strayed heifer, and I came up over the rim, and there she was, below me, on the south-facing slope where the land caught the full weight of the sun, and she was building, stacking sandstone. Flat slabs and round cobbles and chunks she'd levered up out of the wash, fitting them together dry, no mortar, just the patient mathematics of weight on weight. A wall that curved like a smile, maybe shoulder-high, maybe 40 feet end to end. She had 2 younger women helping some days, and on other days I'd notice over the weeks she worked alone. She worked in the worst of the heat. She worked like the wall owed her money. And I thought what every fool on that rim thought. I thought, what in the world is that for? It didn't pen anything too low, too open at both ends. It didn't hold back water, it sat above the wash, not across it. It didn't mark a boundary anybody recognized. It just sat there on the slope, soaking up sun, a long curved useless thing that a tired old woman was killing herself to build for reasons none of us could fathom. I mentioned it in town. God help me, I made a joke of it. There was a group of us outside the mercantile HOLLIS who ran the freight, and the PRATT brothers, an old DEAVER who'd lost half a hand to a rope and used the other half mostly for pointing at things he disapproved of, and HOLLIS said, "What's the squaw building down in the draw?" using the word we used then, the word I won't use now, and I said something. I said something clever. I said it was probably a wall to keep the foolishness in, and they laughed, and I felt the warmth of being laughed, with instead of laughed at, which is a drug, and I have been ashamed of that sentence for 40 years. Because here is the thing I did not know, standing on that rim in August, sweating and superior. The Stone Woman knew exactly what she was building. She had watched that slope her whole life. She knew the sun swung low and southern in winter, and that the sandstone drank heat all day and gave it back all night, slow, the way a stone you've left by the fire stays warm in your bedroll long after the flames are gone. She knew the curve of the wall would cup the weak winter light and throw it back on the ground at its foot and break the killing north wind, and make in that one small pocket of earth a place that lied to the seeds about what month it was. She knew because she had paid attention. For years, quietly, while the rest of us were busy being certain. She was not building a wall. She was building a season. The winter came early, and it came wrong. I can give you the date the snow started because I wrote it down. The 11th of November, which was 3 weeks before any winter had a right to start in that country. It snowed for 2 days, and we thought, well, that's a hard opening, and then it warmed just enough to glaze everything in ice, and then it snowed again, and from there it simply did not stop being terrible. The old-timers, the ones who'd say they'd seen everything, went quiet. That's how you knew. When the men WHOVE seen everything stop talking, you're in trouble. The cattle died first along the fence lines, where they drifted with the wind and pressed up against the wire and couldn't go on and couldn't turn back and just stood there and froze standing up, so that come morning there'd be a row of them like statues, frost on their lashes, eyes open. I'd find them on my rides. I stopped counting them out loud because Tom was old enough to do the arithmetic and I didn't want him doing it. The hay we'd put up was gone by Christmas. The grass was under 2 feet of snow and a crust of ice you'd cut your hands open clawing through. There was no feed to buy in town because there was no feed anywhere, and even if there had been there was no road to haul it on, and even if there'd been a road there was no money, because what we had was tied up in animals that were turning to meat we couldn't even reach to butcher, half of them dead in drifts we couldn't dig to. I'm telling you about the cattle, but you understand it wasn't about the cattle. It was about the larder. It was about Mary measuring the flour with her eyes every morning and thinking I didn't notice. It was about Ada, fearless Ada, going quiet in the afternoons, which she never did, sitting close to the stove with her knees pulled up, and me realizing one day that a 6-year-old goes quiet when she's hungry and has worked out that asking won't help. It was about beans and dried meat and one sack of cornmeal, and the slow, ferocious math of how many days that made if I ate a little less, which I did, and Mary ate a little less, which she did without ever once mentioning it, and we both pretended the children didn't see us not eating. By the middle of January I had stopped sleeping. I'd lie there and run the ledger in my head, the real ledger, the one that didn't balance no matter how I worked it, and around 3 in the morning the arithmetic would always come out the same. Not enough, not enough, not enough. And that's when I started thinking about the draw. I knew, everyone knew, in the vague, resentful way people know things about their neighbors, that the Apache families weren't starving the way we were. There was talk in town, what little town there was by then, men meeting at the half-buried mercantile with that cornered look. "They've got food down there," said like an accusation, said like the food was something stolen out of our own mouths instead of something those 40 people had the foresight and the labor to put by while we were laughing at walls. I listened to that talk. I let it work in me. It's easy when you're frightened to decide that the people who prepared owe something to the people who didn't. It's one of the oldest and ugliest sums a man can do, and I did it, sitting at my own table with my own children hungry, and I am not going to soften it for you. So on the morning of the 22nd of January, I told Mary I was going to look for cattle along the rim. I took the rifle. I rode toward the draw. The cold that morning was a living thing. It got in through the seams. My eyelashes froze together if I held them shut too long, and I had to keep blinking deliberately, and the snow had that high blue color it gets when it's far too cold to snow anymore. The sky scraped clean and merciless, the sun up but giving nothing, a coin you couldn't spend. My horse hated me. I didn't blame her. Somewhere down the draw a dog barked twice and quit, as if even that was too much effort. I came up over the rim above the settlement the same way I had in August, and I stopped, because I'd meant to scout the place first, to see where they kept things, to do my thieving with some sense. And from the rim I looked down at the south slope. And I forgot entirely why I had come. There was the wall, that same long, curving, useless wall, except now it had snow drifted along its top and its northern face, a white cap on red stone, and at its foot, in the cupped warm pocket, the curve of it made bare ground. Dark earth, no snow, steaming faintly in the cold where the stored heat of the rock met the frozen air. And in that dark earth in rows was a garden. I have tried many times to describe what that did to me, and I've never gotten it right, so I'll just tell you what I saw. Spinach, hunched low and dark and Savoy-leaved, the cold weather kind that gets sweeter the harder it freezes. Some pale spears of something, leeks, I'd learn, or their cousin, turnip greens. A run of small lettuces tucked right up against the warmest stones. A frame of bent willow over part of it with hides and old cloth thrown across, that they'd lift in the sun and lower at night. But the wall did most of the work. The wall and the sun and the slow exhale of the rock. And it was alive, all of it, green and silver green and alive in a dead white world. The only living color for 40 miles in any direction. And I sat my horse on that rim with the wind cutting through me, and I started, to my own astonishment, to cry. Not for the food. For the wall. For the August of it. For the woman carrying rock in the heat while I made jokes at the mercantile. For the simple, unbearable fact that while the rest of us were being certain, she had been right, and I had helped a whole valley laugh at her for it. And now here I was on the rim above her garden with a rifle on my back and theft in my heart, come to take by force the harvest of the very foresight I'd mocked. I want to tell you I turned around. I want to tell you the sight of it shamed me clean, and I rode home empty-handed and noble. That's not what happened. What happened is I got down off my horse because I couldn't sit a saddle and weep at the same time. A man has some dignity, and I led her down the slope toward the wall, meaning, I don't even know what I meant. To look. To stand in the only warm 3 feet of the territory for a minute. To put off, a little longer, the decision I'd ridden out to make. And I came around the curved end of that wall into the lee of it, into the strange, unseasonable warmth of it. And I knelt down, and I touched the dark, steaming earth with my bare hand, because I needed to know it was real. And that's when I picked the leaf, that one curl of frost-edged spinach, held it up, turned it over and over. And a voice behind me, dry and unsurprised and just faintly amused, said in careful English, "You can stand up. The rock is warmer if you stand." I had not heard her come. I never did that whole winter. She moved over the snow like she had an arrangement with it. I came up off my knees and turned around with the stolen leaf still in my fist and my rifle on my back and my face wet and frozen. And there she was, the stone woman, wrapped in a blanket the color of the wall, looking at me. Not afraid, not angry. Looking at me the way you'd look at a coyote that had wandered into the yard, assessing, unhurried, deciding how much trouble I was likely to be. Her eyes went once to the rifle, then back to my face, then down to the leaf crushed in my hand. And she did a thing I have never been able to forgive her for and never stopped being grateful for, both at once, for 40 years. She smiled, that whole web of laugh lines opening up around her eyes, and she said, like she was finishing a conversation we'd started in August, "So not so useless. I have heard a great many sentences in my life and forgotten nearly all of them, but I could recite that one in my sleep. 4 words. She didn't gloat them. That's the part that undid me. A person with any meanness in her would have made me pay for August right there, would have let me stand in my own shame and twist, and Lord knows I'd earned it. Instead, she said it the way you'd point out that the weather had turned, a plain fact, offered without heat. And then she looked at the rifle on my back again, longer this time, and held out her hand. Not for the rifle, for the leaf. I'd forgotten I was still crushing it. I opened my fist and it lay there in my palm, bruised dark where I'd gripped it, and she took it from me with 2 fingers, looked at the ruin I'd made of it, and made a small sound in the back of her throat. The sound any woman makes over good food spoiled by carelessness. The sound my own mother had made. The sound Mary made, and that ordinary domestic disapproval reached into me deeper than any sermon. I had wasted something. In the middle of a famine, with a garden's worth of green in front of me and a starving house behind me, I had taken a living thing and squeezed the life out of it for no reason but my own nerves, and she was not going to let it pass uncommented. "Sit," she said. I sat, on a flat, warm stone at the foot of the wall, and I'll tell you, the warmth of it coming up through my frozen trousers was the first comfort my body had felt in 2 months, and it nearly broke me all over again. She crouched a few feet off, the blanket pooling around her, and she looked at me with those assessing eyes, and the rifle lay across the gap between us like a third party to the conversation, and we both knew it. "You came to take food," she said, "not a question." There was no point lying to a woman who'd watched me ride down off the rim with a long gun and a wet face. "Yes." "You have children." "2." She nodded slowly, like that settled something in a column she'd been keeping. "How many days?" I knew what she meant, the arithmetic. The 3 in the morning arithmetic. And the strange thing, the thing I still can't fully explain, is that I told her the true number, the number I hadn't even told Mary, the number I'd been carrying alone in the dark for a week. 9 days. Maybe 11 if Mary keeps doing what she's doing, which is not eating and pretending to. The lines around her eyes changed. Not pity, she was too clear-eyed for pity. Pity is for people you've already decided can't be helped. Something more like recognition. She'd done that same math I'd learned, many winters, for more mouths than mine. She stood. She walked along the foot of the wall with that gait that didn't disturb the snow, and she began to gather spinach, the good dark Savoy leaves, into a fold of her blanket, a bundle of the leeks, Turnips, small and pale, pulled from the warm earth with a twist. Greens. She worked quickly and without ceremony, and she did not ask me to help, and she did not ask me anything at all. And when the fold of her blanket was heavy, she came back and held it out. I didn't take it. I want that written down too, alongside the shameful things, because a man's account should balance. I didn't take it. I sat on that warm stone with my hands in my lap, and I shook my head, and I said, and my voice came out wrong, cracked, a stranger's voice, I came here to steal from you. You understand that? I had it in my mind to come back tonight with a sack. I made a joke about this wall in front of 7 men in town. I called it a wall to keep the foolishness in. Why I confessed all that, I cannot tell you. Maybe because a gift you haven't earned sits worse in the belly than hunger does. Maybe because I needed her to know what she was being generous to, so the generosity would mean what it was supposed to mean. Maybe I just wanted to be seen plainly by somebody, even at my worst, after 2 months of performing strength for my family across a table I couldn't fill. She listened to all of it. She did not flinch. And when I was done, she set the bundle down on the warm stone beside me, close enough that I'd have to actively refuse it now, refuse it with my hands, not just my pride, and she said something I have turned over for 40 years. I know what you called it, she said. The slope carries voices up. I heard the men laugh in the summer. A pause. I built it anyway. I built it anyway. That was the whole of her. That was the woman entire. She had heard us laughing, heard me laughing, perhaps, my clever sentence floating up the slope on the August air, and she had picked up the next stone and set it on the wall. She had not built it to prove us wrong. She didn't care enough about being proven right to spend a single summer day on it. She'd built it because winter was coming and children would be hungry, and a wall that drank the sun would feed them. And the opinions of 7 men outside a mercantile were less than the weight of 1 stone. Take it home, she said. Bring the empty cloth back. I will show you what to do with the turnip tops so nothing is wasted. Her eyes flicked one final time to the rifle. And leave the wolf gun. You will not need it on this slope. I left it. I rode home with a fold of green against my chest under my coat to keep it from freezing, and an empty rifle scabbard, and a head so full I could barely steer the horse. And that's how the worst thing I ever set out to do became the beginning of the best part of my life, not because I was good, but because somebody else was, and let me close enough to catch it. Telling Mary was its own mountain. I'd left that morning a man going to look for cattle. I came back with vegetables and no rifle and a face that had clearly been doing things faces aren't supposed to do, and Mary Brandt did not raise 400 head of trouble without learning to read weather. She met me at the door. She looked at the bundle. She looked at the empty scabbard. She looked at me. Elias, she said, what did you do? So I told her all of it. The plan I'd ridden out with, I watched that land on her. Watched her understand that the man she'd married had set out that morning to commit a robbery, and watched her decide, in about 2 seconds, to deal with that later. And then the wall, and the green in the snow, and the stone woman, and the 4 words, and I built it anyway. And by the end I was sitting at our empty table with my head in my hands, and Mary was standing behind me with her hand flat between my shoulder blades, not saying anything. Which from Mary was a kind of forgiveness, more total than any words. Then she said, practical as sunrise because that was her whole self, well, we'd best not waste it, wash up. I'll start the greens. And Elias, she waited until I looked at her, you're going to find a way to pay that woman back if it takes you the rest of your days, not in money. She didn't do it for money. You'll know it when you see it. We ate green that night for the first time since October. Ada, quiet, hungry 6-year-old Ada, took one bite of the spinach Mary had cooked down soft with a scrap of fat, and her whole face changed, and she said with enormous gravity, "It tastes green," which made no sense and made perfect sense, and Mary laughed for the first time in weeks, a real laugh that turned into something wetter halfway through, and Tom ate 3 helpings without a word, and then carefully, seriously, asked if he could come with me when I brought the cloth back. Because he wanted to see the wall that grew food, and I said yes, And that was the second best decision I made that winter. I went back. Of course I went back. With the empty cloth and with Tom on the saddle in front of me. And over the next 2 weeks I went back a dozen times. And what happened in those 2 weeks rearranged something in me that had been set wrong for a long while. The stone woman showed me the garden the way you'd show a stranger your child's report card, not bragging, just glad of the company of someone finally willing to look. She showed me how the wall threw heat. She put my hand on the south face at midday, hot as a stovetop, and then made me come back after dark and feel it again, still warm, still breathing it out into the cupped pocket of earth while the rest of the world went a 40 below. She showed me the willow frame and the hides, how they trapped the day's warmth at night, how she'd learned the exact hour to lift them so the morning sun wouldn't cook the seedlings. She showed me which greens loved the cold and got sweeter for it, and which she kept right against the stones where it was warmest. She'd worked all this out over years by watching, by failing, by trying again the next winter. There was no magic in it. That was the wonder of it. It was all just attention, paid faithfully over a long time, by a person everyone had agreed wasn't worth listening to. Tom took to her completely. He'd follow her down the rows asking why the way 9-year-olds do, and where I'd have grown impatient she answered everyone, slow and exact, and I'd see her hand him a seed and close his fingers over it and say something low I couldn't hear, and he'd nod like he'd been entrusted with the secret of the world, which, in a way, he had. I learned later she'd lost a grandson about his age, 2 winters before, to the same kind of cold that was killing my cattle. She never said so. The other women told me. I built it anyway, yes. But she'd also built it for a boy who didn't get to taste it, and now here was a freckled rancher's son following her down the rows, and I think she let herself love him a little, and I think it cost her something to do it, and I think she decided he was worth the cost. I started bringing what I had, which wasn't much. A side of frozen beef I'd finally managed to butcher off a fresh dead cow, better than letting it rot in a drift, and they had meat hunger same as we had green hunger. The whole country's diet had narrowed to whatever each family happened to have too much or too little of. I brought a coil of good wire. I brought my back, when the wall needed a slipped stone reset after a hard freeze heaved the ground. We were not friends exactly. There was too much history between her people and mine, too much blood that wasn't mine to apologize for and wasn't hers to forgive. But we became something. 2 people who had each seen the other at a true moment, her building in the heat, me weeping in the cold, and decided not to look away. And the whole time, underneath, I was uneasy, because I had not been the only man in that country doing the 3 in the morning arithmetic, and I knew exactly what was being said at the mercantile, because 2 months earlier I'd been the one saying it. They've got food down there. They came on the 4th of February. I wrote it down. I wrote all of it down that same night with a shaking hand. Because I knew even then it was the kind of thing that gets remembered wrong on purpose, and I wanted at least one honest account to exist. I was at the wall when they came. That was luck, or grace, or whatever you want to call the thing that puts you in the right place to do the only decent act of your life. Tom was home. Mary had kept him back that day, a head cold, and I'd ridden down alone to help the stone woman rebank a section of frame the wind had torn loose in the night. We were both crouched at the south end, hands deep in cold willow and frozen hide, when the dogs in the settlement set up a sound I hadn't heard them make before. Not the bark at a coyote, the other one, the one that means men. I stood up. 9 of them coming down the draw on horseback, strung out single file along the only trail the snow allowed. I knew everyone. Hollies from the freight, both Pratt brothers, Deaver with his half a hand, young Cobb Sutton who I'd taught to rope, 3 others whose names I'll keep out of this because their grandchildren still ranch that country and the children shouldn't carry it. And at the front, leading them, a man named Royce Tillman who'd lost his whole herd and his wife to the fever the same week and had decided, somewhere in his ruin, that the world owed him and he meant to collect. They had guns. Of course they had guns. Men frightened enough to do a wrong thing always bring guns to make the wrong thing feel like protection. They had a wagon, too, dragged behind on a makeshift sledge of runners, empty, and the sight of that empty wagon told me everything. They hadn't come to ask. You don't bring a wagon to ask. The stone woman stood up beside me, slow, brushing the frost off her blanket, and she watched them come with the same unhurried, assessing look she'd given me and my rifle 2 weeks before. Behind us, in the settlement, I could hear movement, the families gathering the way families do when the dogs make that sound. 40 people, maybe a dozen of them men of fighting age, the rest old or women or children. Against 9 armed riders led by a man with nothing left to lose, which is the most dangerous animal God ever made. And here was the decision. Here was the morally heavy thing, sitting in my chest like a swallowed stone. Because I could ride out and meet them on the trail and they'd take me for one of their own, a fellow rancher, white, hungry, who'd had the same idea first. I could fold right in. Took you long enough, boys. No one would ever know I'd come down here weeks ago meaning the same thing. I'd go home with a full wagon and my family would eat, and the men of the territory would clap me on the back. And the only cost would be everything the last 2 weeks had made of me, and a wall, and a woman, and a boy named Tom who thought his father knew which things were worth more than they looked. Or, I looked at the stone woman. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the riders, calculating, and I understood with a lurch that turned my stomach that she was calculating how many of her own people would die if this went the way that empty wagon wanted it to go, and whether there was any version of the next 10 minutes that ended with the children safe. She'd made hard sums before. She was making one now. And she had not asked me for anything, not a single thing. Not in 2 weeks. She'd only ever given. And I understood that she would not ask me now either, would not so much as glance at me to see which way I'd jump, because she had long ago stopped expecting men like me to jump the right way. Mary's voice came back to me, clear as the cold. You're going to find a way to pay that woman back. You'll know it when you see it. I saw it. I walked out from the foot of the wall, out past the warm pocket of green into the deep snow, and I put myself square in the middle of the trail between the riders and the settlement, with the wall and the garden and the 40 people behind me, and I held up my empty hand so they'd see I'd come down without a rifle. I'd left the wolf gun home, hadn't carried one since the day she told me to leave it, and I waited for Royce Tillman to ride close enough to hear me. And my heart was going like a trapped bird, and I had no idea on God's earth what I was going to say. Tillman pulled up maybe 20 feet off. The others bunched behind him. 9 cold, hard, frightened faces, breath steaming, and every one of them knew me, and every one of them was working out the same as I had, that a man standing in front of the thing they'd come to take was no longer one of them. Elias, Tillman said, careful, step aside, this ain't your fight. And I opened my mouth, with no plan and no speech and nothing in me but 2 weeks of grace I hadn't earned and didn't want to betray, and I heard myself say. And what I heard myself say back was not brave, and it was not clever, and 40 years on I'm glad of both those things, because brave and clever are what men reach for when they're performing, and I wasn't performing. I was just telling the truth, the way I'd told it to the stone woman on the warm stone 2 weeks before, because the truth had become the only ground I could stand on. I came down here in January to do exactly what you're doing now, I said. That stopped him. It stopped all of them. 9 men who'd ridden down expecting either a fellow rancher to wave them through or a row of strangers to point guns at, and instead the man in the trail was confessing his own intended crime, out loud in the cold, with his empty hands up. I rode down with a rifle and a plan to come back at night with a sack, I went on, and my voice was steadier than my chest. Same arithmetic you all did. They've got food, we don't, they owe us. I did that some at my own table with my own kids hungry. So don't any of you tell me I don't understand. I understand better than any man here because I almost did it. I let that sit. The wind moved the snow in little hissing snakes across the crust between us. And you know what stopped me, Royce? Not goodness. I want to be plain. I'm not standing here because I'm a better man than you. I'm standing here because I saw the wall. I pointed back over my shoulder, at the long red curve of it, the snow capping the north face, the impossible green steaming at its foot in the dead heart of February. That woman built that in August, I said, in heat that drop a horse while we stood outside the mercantile and laughed at her. I made the joke myself. Some of you heard me make it. A wall to keep the foolishness in that was mine, and I'm ashamed of it. She heard us laughing. The slope carries voices. She heard us and she built it anyway because she knew winter was coming and children would be hungry and a wall that drinks the sun would feed them. She did the work. We did the laughing. And now you want to ride down and take the harvest of the only person in this whole country who had the sense and the spine to prepare for what was coming. I lowered my hand. You can do it. There's 9 of you and you've got guns, but you'll have to come through me to get to it. And I want every one of you to ride home tonight knowing you killed a neighbor to steal from a woman who'd have given you food if you'd come down here with your hat in your hand instead of a wagon and a rifle. Nobody moved. I'd like to tell you my speech turned them, that words did it, that the better angels won. That's not quite the shape of it. What turned them was something I couldn't have planned and didn't see coming, and it's the part of this story I think about most, because it's the part that cost the most and got seen the least. The stone woman walked out from the foot of the wall. Past me. Out into the snow, into the open, into the line of fire. An old woman in a stone-colored blanket walking toward 9 armed men with her hands open and empty at her sides. And she did not stop beside me. She went past me, putting herself in front between me and the guns, which is to say she stepped into the place I'd taken to protect her and quietly took it back, so that if anyone fired, she'd be first. I have never in my life seen anything braver, and she did it without a word, and I think that's why it worked when my words alone wouldn't have. Words can be argued with. A grandmother walking unarmed into your gun barrels cannot. It reaches a place underneath argument. Even Tillman, even ruined Tillman with nothing left to lose, you watched it reach him. You watched his face do the thing faces do when the story a man has told himself stops fitting what's in front of him. She looked up the line of them, and then she did the last thing any of us expected. She turned back toward the settlement and she called out, not loud, but it carried. And after a moment 2 of the younger women came out, and then a few more of the families, and they were carrying things. Bundles. The good dark spinach. Leeks. A basket of the small pale turnips. They came out into the snow and they walked toward the riders and they began, without a word from anyone, to load that empty wagon. To load it. The stone woman stood in the trail and watched her own people pack the food she'd grown into the sledge of the men who'd come to steal it. And when the wagon held a fair share, not everything, a fair share measured, she watched the measuring with those clear assessing eyes. She held up a hand and they stopped. And she said in her careful English, loud enough for all 9 of them, "Now there is no reason to kill anyone." That was the whole genius of her, do you see? She had taken the one thing the wagon wanted, the food, and removed it as a reason to spill blood, by simply giving it, on her terms, in her measure, with witnesses, so that every man there had to ride home not as a raider who'd taken at gunpoint, but as a beggar who'd been given charity by the people he'd come to rob. She'd turned their theft into her gift. She'd made it so the only story they could ever tell about this day was a story of their own shame and her own mercy. There is no revenge a person can take that's heavier than that, and there is no kindness either, and she'd done both at once, with a basket of turnips, while standing in front of 9 guns. The men rode out, Tillman last. He stopped beside me on the trail. I was still standing where I'd planted myself, and he looked at me a long moment, and there was something working in his ruined face, and he didn't say sorry. Men of that country and that age didn't have the word, but he said low, "I lost everything, Elias," and I said, "I know it, Royce, because I did," and he nodded once and rode up the draw after the others with a wagon full of food he'd be ashamed of every time he ate it. I never told anyone in town what really happened that day. The version that got around was that the Apache families had shared out with the ranchers during the hard winter, which was true enough on its face and a lie underneath, and I let it stand because the truth belonged to her and she never once tried to spread it. I built it anyway. She'd have given the food and kept the story too, except she didn't want the story. She'd never wanted any of it. She'd only ever wanted the children fed. That was the price no one saw. I didn't understand it that day. I understood it slowly over the weeks after, as the worst of the winter finally cracked and broke, and the thaw came roaring down the draws. She'd given away too much. The garden at the wall was a small thing, that was the point of it, a small precise miracle, exactly enough for 40 people to scrape through a single brutal winter if nothing went wrong. And then a great deal had gone wrong. A wagon load given to men with guns. The frozen weeks dragged longer than any winter had a right to. And the stone woman, I came to learn, had been doing what Mary had done at our table, eating a little less, and a little less, so the children's share held. She'd carried rock in August. She'd stood in front of guns in February. And somewhere in between she'd quietly given her own portion away, day after day, the way she gave everything away, without announcement, in measures only she was counting. By the time the thaw came, she was thin in a way that frightened the other women, and she got a chest cold that a strong year would have shrugged off. And that spring, it went down into her lungs and stayed. I rode down as often as Mary could spare me. I brought what we had more now. The thaw had freed up the cattle that were still alive, 31 head out of 430, but alive, and the bottomland was greening, and the territory was crawling back toward living. I brought beef and the first wild greens off our own slope, and once, when Ada insisted, a fistful of early desert flowers she'd picked herself, yellow ones, which the stone woman held in her thin hand and looked at for a long time and would not let anyone throw out even after they'd dried to nothing. Tom came every time. He'd sit by her and tell her about the calves and the creek and the things a 10-year-old thinks are news, and she'd listen with her eyes half closed. And once I saw her reach over and close his fingers around something the way she had that first winter. A seed, I think, though I never asked. Some things aren't yours to ask, and say something low I couldn't hear. He never told me what. He's an old man himself now, Tom, with grandchildren of his own, and he's never told me. And I've stopped wanting to know because whatever it was hers to give and his to keep. She didn't make a long thing of dying. She wasn't a woman who made long things of anything. There came a morning in May when I rode down and the dogs were quiet in the wrong way, and the women met me at the edge of the settlement. And I knew, and I got down off my horse and stood in the road and took my hat off and didn't know what to do with my hands. But she'd left me something first. A week before, on one of the good days, when she was sitting up in the spring sun with her back against the south face of the wall, her wall, warm under her shoulders even then, she'd made me sit beside her, and she'd made me a promise to keep, and that is the thing I have spent the rest of my life trying to do. She didn't ask me to remember her, she'd have thought that vain. She didn't ask me to make the territory sorry, or to put her name on anything, or to tell the true story so she'd get the credit. She never asked for credit in her life, and she wasn't going to start at the end of it. What she said was this. She put her hand flat on the warm stone beside her, the way she'd once put my hand flat on it to feel the heat coming through, and she said, "When you see a thing you do not understand, and you are a man who is sure of too much, do not laugh at it. Build it anyway if it is yours to build. And if it is not yours, then stand out of the way of the one who builds it." She turned and looked at me with those clear, unhurried eyes, lighter now, tired, but clear to the last. "That is all. That is the whole of it. Teach it to the boy." I said I would. She nodded once, the way she nodded when something got entered in a column she was keeping, and she turned her face back to the sun, and we sat there a while longer not talking. Against the wall everyone had called useless, in the warmth it was still throwing off, two people who had each seen the other at a true moment and never once looked away. I'm an old man now. I've kept the promise as best a flawed man can, which is to say I've broken it 100 times and gone back to it 101. I have caught myself, more times than I can count, about to laugh at a thing I didn't understand, a neighbor's strange method, a young person's strange idea, a strange new way of doing an old hard task, and I have heard her voice, dry and unsurprised, "Do not laugh at it," and I have shut my mouth and gone and looked closer and learned something. Not always. I'm not going to pretend I became a wise man. I became a man who knows what wisdom sounds like, which is a different and lesser thing, but it's something, and it came from her. The wall is still there. I rode out to see it last autumn, slow, my joints what they are, with Tom driving the wagon because I'm not to be trusted with reins any more, apparently, and his granddaughter along, a girl about Ada's age that first winter, fearless the same way. The settlement's long gone, that's a harder story and not mine to tell, and you know the shape of it without my telling. But the wall stood. 40 feet of dry-stacked sandstone, gold and rust and that deep red where the sun's been on it, curved like a smile, snow-capped on the north face the day we went. And at the foot of it, in the cupped warm pocket the curve still makes, where the rock still drinks the sun all day and breathes it back all night, something was growing. Wild now, gone to seed and reseeded 100 times over the years. But green. Volunteer greens, the cold hardy kind, the kind that gets sweeter the harder it freezes, still coming up against that wall after all this time, fed by nothing but stone and sun and the long-ago attention of a woman who paid it. Tom's granddaughter ran ahead and crouched down at the wall and put her hand on the south face, and turned back to us with her whole small face amazed. "Grandpa," she called to Tom, "it's warm." And Tom, my serious boy, 60 now, gray as a January sky, got down off the wagon slower than I'd have liked and went and knelt beside her in the dirt, and put his old hand flat on the stone next to her small one, and I watched him close her fingers around something and lean down and say something low I couldn't hear. I didn't ask what. Some things aren't yours to ask. I just sat in the wagon in the autumn sun and looked at the wall they'd called useless, the wall that grew fresh food in the coldest winter, the wall a whole valley laughed at while one woman carried rock in the heat. And I thought about how she never did find out she was right. Not really, because being right was never what she was after. She was after the children fed. And the children were fed. And somewhere down the years, a girl I'll not live to see grown is going to crouch at that warm red stone and feel the sun another woman saved for her, and not know a single name, and learn the only thing that ever mattered anyway, which is that the things people call useless are sometimes just the things they haven't taken the time to understand.